so something that I think that you hint at in your original article and your book is that do what you love is actually, I mean, as you lay out, there are all of these ways in which it is pernicious and, it is kind of the, as you say, capitalism's most perfect ideological tool. But at the same time, we can also understand how it originated. If you think about the mantra, do what you love, the other half of the slogan is do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right? I think that really speaks to a pretty reasonable response that lots of people have under, the pressures of capitalism and the fact that we all have to, or, the vast majority of us have to earn a wage to survive. Alienated work sucks, right? It sucks being alienated from your labor. Like everybody, I think people understandably want to find meaning in their work since we have to be at work at least 8 hours every day, right? And, it makes sense. It's kind of like, if you have to go to work, it kind of makes sense that you want it to be something that you like, right? So there's that, so there's that kind of aspect. And I think that, part of what makes your essay so powerful is that I think, while you identify sort of these pernicious aspects of do what you love, I don't think that you are framing it as just this like false consciousness that we can all sort of think our way out of. You don't use Lauren Berlant's phrase cruel optimism explicitly, but I think that what you're getting at is something sort of closer to that. Like we can understand why people go down the do what you love path, but at the end of the day, it might end up hurting us even more. So I guess, how do you think we can fight the do what you love mentality without kind of like, both how can we acknowledge people's desire to find meaningful work, but at the same time sort of fight this do what you love mentality, but at the same time not kind of slip into, being like this like wake up sheeple sort of response, which by the way you don't do, but that is, I don't know, that is kind of like a plausible extension, I think.
It's understandable. I mean, I think, just one can tell from your question, like it's such a difficult needle to thread, right? Because, we have to work. Like we have to just get things done. That's a fact. And also I personally believe like it is an essential aspect of human nature that people like productive activity. People like coming together with other people and accomplishing things. And I'm not too, I also just think that, kind of the wake up sheeple or like these post-work, like, imaginings, I think, they're actually strangely, like, they're not terribly appealing to people, for all kinds of reasons. I mean, I think the key is, recognizing the conditions of one's work, and also recognizing our obligations to one another, because at times we all find ourselves doing work that is frustrating or boring or gross, or like we're not in the mood for it. And I think one thing that sometimes doesn't get, I understand why, but, it doesn't get talked about on the left as much, are obligations.
Mm-hmm.
There's the other, there's like the to each according to his need, but there's also the from each according to, I think there's a real need to think about like what maybe we do owe each other. I mean, this is getting kind of abstract and philosophical, but I think it's important because I think sometimes that's the piece that gets a little bit lost sometimes. And for me, that really comes down to thinking about conditions of work. So yes, we do things like work-wise that sometimes we're not in the mood for, or don't feel like doing, but then what are the conditions of that? Am I getting compensated appropriately? Am I doing something that is really difficult but necessary? Am I doing that in a safe environment? I think, am I doing that in a way that, I think the benefit is actually appreciated? I mean, if you kind of extract that out to, let's say, care work, for instance, I mean, that's, the obvious example to me of the thing that gets kind of dropped. These are things that like absolutely need to get done, often get done for very low or usually no pay. So I think it's kind of, but they are obligations. They are things that we as a society absolutely must do. So that's kind of like one piece of it. And the other is, again, when we're maybe, I noticed that like during the pandemic, people who were stuck at home, either willingly or unwillingly, took to doing all kinds of productive things like, growing little windowsill gardens or like cooking. And I think people really, came to understand that there's a lot of pleasure to be had in doing something productive when you're not being surveilled, not rushing. You get to do it the way you want to do it. You get to keep what you make. So I think, and those are the conditions in which I think you can, one does most easily and readily find meaning and even like pleasure and delight, in stuff that is work, or at least, productive activity. And thinking about how the extent to which we can translate some of those positive conditions to the workplace might be a good place to start in response to your question.
This is obviously much easier said than done, but I also wonder if things like full employment or like a job guarantee are kind of ideas that might go a long way in sort of defanging this do what you love mentality. Because I mean, it shouldn't be up to just the individual to kind of like think our way out of this problem, but rather what are some larger I guess, more sweeping or like even structural reforms that could happen to kind of mitigate, this rat race to try to make some sort of meaning out of work, I guess.
Yeah, I think, full employment's an interesting idea. I mean, I think that, again, the New York Times, you can kind of feel the pulse of society, but they ran 2 or 3 articles about shortages of school support workers, people like cafeteria workers and bus drivers. These are not necessarily the kind of workers that always get written about in the New York Times. So you can see that people are really like there is very necessary work that needs to be done. There's a shortage of people who are able to do it because usually the pay is too low. The schedules are too erratic. And again, other kind of issues of condition, not the fact that this is like, unnecessary work or just kind of make work. And I think, in terms of getting those positions staffed appropriately and responsibly, something like full employment could be a way to move in that direction. I think another big idea that's gained some traction that's kind of surprised me is, 2 of them. One is shorter working hours. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember the exact year, unfortunately, when Jeremy Corbyn lost his position in the Labour Party. And one of the things that was heavily criticized was the Labour Party's manifesto. It was just seen as out of touch with reality, a little too just kind of kooky and far out. And one of the things people pointed to, even people who were sympathetic, was the proposal for a 4-day work week, which was like openly mocked. I don't think it would be dismissed as quickly out of hand today. I think I've started to see kind of not just 4-day work week, but some form of reducing working hours. Again, that kind of conversation kind of percolating in non-explicitly left discourses, which I think is really, really fascinating. And then the other big change that I've noticed is support for childcare at the federal level. Right now, there is some kind of like childcare worker support relief being proposed at the federal level, and that is amazing to me. It was not motivated by like a mass movement or millions of people calling their Congress people. I think it appears to be a top-down thing that is motivated by the fact that people literally cannot afford to go to work. Right. And that's a problem for employers, obviously, but also for just like the basic functioning of society. And so I think that, in the few years after Red for Ed, like after the pandemic, we're at this moment where the president of the United States is recognizing that childcare is costs are out of control, and something needs to be done to rectify that situation. So I think that is also, again, kind of remarkable, and a big change that I'm seeing. In response to, I think, a whole bunch of developments that have occurred since the article came out.
Yeah, so I think I want to kind of wrap up all of this by asking you about the pandemic, right? Because this has kind of been the most recent and, arguably the most momentous shift or change in how we work, how we think about work, how we approach work. Obviously, something that's going on right now is what a lot of commentators have termed the Great Resignation. So I saw that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they basically said that in July alone, 4 million people quit their jobs. Lots of people are dropping out of the labor force, both voluntarily and sort of involuntarily. And we can get to that. I think something like, healthcare and tech in particular have been losing workers. And I saw some funny or crazy statistic in Business Insider just this morning that said something like 76% of workers right now are considering leaving their job. And I didn't delve into that particular poll, so I can't vouch for the methodology. But the point is that there's clearly something going on there. Work as we know it saw a huge disruption during the pandemic. And I think lots of people are evaluating, their relationship to work, their relationship to their jobs, both on the professional end of the spectrum and I think on the low wage end as well. I mean, we've seen, that even though in September, tons of people were kicked off, something like 8 million people were kicked off unemployment, but at the same time, the economy only added a little over 100,000 jobs. There's clearly, people have complained about a labor shortage and how they can't get people to fill these bad jobs. So I guess, just to kind of bring everything together, this is a little bit speculative, but what do you think will happen to work and the ideology of work post-pandemic?
Yeah, what will happen to work? I think some. Gosh, first, let me back up to the people leaving their jobs. And, I am curious to know the methodology behind that Business Insider study too. Because I feel like if you take any random 5 minutes during a workday, a certain high percentage of people will just be thinking about,
right.
What does thinking about leaving your job mean? Does it mean being frustrated after a meeting for 10 minutes or, long-term kind of, I don't know, some a pebble in your shoe. But I think that I think people are leaving. Clearly, people are leaving the workforce, and I think that as has been discussed earlier, I think it's maybe too soon to really understand why everyone is leaving, and I think that's why again it's this many people are thinking about leaving their jobs. It's kind of a tricky thing because, yes, there is a huge trend, but on the other hand, these are incredibly personal decisions for every single individual who makes them. So I think people leaving their jobs, there's all kinds of reasons, from lack of childcare to, the nature of many jobs changed to be just unbelievably difficult during the pandemic, particularly teaching. For instance, teaching third grade over Zoom is, it's not someone who's maybe put 25 years into a career wants to be doing at that stage. And maybe, that could trigger a thought of retiring early or something like that. But yeah, I think we'll see what happens. I think that, by and large, my prediction is people will be returning to physical workplaces. I think some people will continue working remotely, but I don't see that. I think a lot of people, again, continued to go to work every day throughout the pandemic.
Right.
Even professional workers, people like airline pilots and doctors were never worked remotely. So I think I know that got written about a lot and kind of worried about and theorized a lot, but I actually think that was probably not the majority of people.
No, we actually now have numbers that show something like only 13% of workers in the labor force switch to remote work, which you wouldn't know from the media coverage about like our new normal of like Zoom and sweatpants, that kind of dominated the media cycle throughout the course of the pandemic. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think one of the big things to me that might have changed about from the pandemic is I think people became very aware of the lack of control over their own time. And I mean, that is one of the things we give up when we go to work, even when we are working, doing a job that is necessary and, if we're lucky, generally fulfilling, is I think that there's a greater awareness of, we know what we get out of work. Like we get a paycheck and we get certain kinds of other perks and benefits, like tangible and intangible. But I think there's an awareness of what it costs us as well in terms of our own time, in terms of our own peace of mind. And that I think, I don't know how that will manifest itself. But I think that is something that is probably here to stay. And I think people are more aware of, since a big disruption like the pandemic just made everyone aware that, on a broad level, like things don't have to be a certain way. I know that's extremely broad and vague, but you fall into a routine going to work and, I've got to do it and this has to happen this way. And then this has to happen by this deadline. And then 1 week, in March of 2020, and like none of the things that absolutely had to happen got done. I think people were like, oh my gosh. So that's very open-ended, but I think that is something that, and you see that in the Great Resignations. I think people realize that, maybe I can retire a couple of years early, who are lucky enough to be able to think that. But even people who are on the lower, earning end of the spectrum realized this is like, I'm working for like $8 an hour. Like that's an hour of my life that I will never get back. And I think those kinds of trade-offs just became much clearer to people. And so we'll see what happens.
I think that is a good note to end on, to be continued. It obviously, the pandemic isn't over yet, and clearly the labor market is still very much in flux. So I, will be very interested to see what kind of comes out of this. All right, Miya Tokumitsu, again, the author of Do What You Love. We are going to link her Jacobin article in the description box below. So if you haven't yet checked it out, it's definitely high time to read that. Miya, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.